Assalamualaikum. Our group will be presenting about classroom observation and field note. A classroom observation is an act of watching a teacher's performance in their classroom or learning environment. Classroom observations are a quantitative way of recording and measuring the teacher's behavior and mastery by watching and record them in action. So there are two purposes of classroom observation, which are to improve the teaching practices and to describe the instructional practices. Research using observational methods has yielded important information that has practical implication for the improvement of teaching practices. And one of the problems hindering teachers' classroom instructions has been the lack of valid and accurate information that teachers could use in order to facilitate their professional growth. One of the most important purposes of systematic classroom observation is to improve the teacher's classroom instruction and resolve the problem. So, the feedback from individual classroom profiles derived from the observation has been found to help the teachers understand their own strengths and weaknesses and have enabled them to improve their instruction. This process typically involves having trained observers to observe the teachers and their students in their classroom and later provide the teachers with information about their instruction in clinical sections. So, this approach is based on the assumption that teachers value accurate information that they can use to improve their teaching practices in class. The second purpose of classroom observation research is to describe the current status of instructional practices and identify the instructional problems. There have been many observational studies that have been designed to describe specific educational phenomena. The teacher's observation result revealed that teachers typically focus on the content of the task or assignment, responded to student signal, communicate the task procedures, and check the students' work. However, the teachers were observed spending very little time to interact with the students regarding their personal issues, encourage the student to succeed, showing personal regard for student, and also showing interest in students' work, or whether they have enough time to do the assignment. It shows that the teachers only concerned about the assignment and tasks without actually concerned about the students' feeling or whether they have enough time to do the assignment.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Siti Sahira Adilah binti Zabario and my metric number is 050504. So for now, I'm going to talk about the types of classroom observations. So without further ado, let's go. There are four types of classroom observations. The first one is participant observer, second one non-participant observer, structured observer, and the last one will be unstructured observer. For the first one, participant observer, how do they collect the data? So the observer takes part in the activities during the study while observing. It means the observer participates and takes notes of the situations. The aim of this is to get a deeper insight of the study. For example, the researcher or observer can play a role as a teacher or student in a classroom setting. The observer will engage with the participants. Non-participant observer, the observer is not part of the situation that is being studied. Means she or he watches the activities from a distance. The observer concentrates fully on his interpretations of what he or she sees. For fact, the observer has no influence in the situations. For instance, the observer observed during English class to check their proficiency at high school in Malaysia. Now we will continue to the third types of classroom observation, which is structured observer. So structured observer is a systematic observation because it has guidelines to follow. It is devised before the study starts as it has formulated rules for the observations and recording of behavior. A structured observer usually involve three main sampling, which include event sampling, time sampling, and instantaneous sampling. Event sampling decides the types of behavior that the observer interested in and records all the occurrences. All other behavior will be ignored. Time sampling is when the observer decides in advance that observation will take place only during a specific periods. For example, 10 minutes every 1 hour or 1 hour per day, and records the occurrences of the specific behavior during that period only. For the last one, instantaneous sampling, the observer will decide in advance the pre-selected moment when the observation will take place and records what is happening at that instant only. Everything happens before or after will be ignored. Now we move forward to the last types of classroom observation, which is unstructured observer. Unstructured observer is a non-systematic observation as it has no restrictions of behavior. The observer will monitor all behavior or various informations in the study as he or she does not set a plan in advance. For example, observing children playing with new toys. I think that's all for the types of classroom observation. See you again during part 2.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Syarifah Aisyah, binti Alawi, and my metric number is 050241. So I'm going to talk about the ethical consideration in classroom observation and field notes. So what is ethics? Ethics is focused on well-founded moral values that dictate what humans can do, generally in terms of rights, responsibilities, societal benefits, justice, or specific virtues. And ethical considerations are one of the most important aspects of the research. It is a collection of ideals and principles that answer the issue of what is right and wrong in human affairs.
Ethical consideration in classroom observation.
And ethical consideration in classroom observation includes 5 points. The first one is all parties, including the teacher, observer, students, and school board, must be informed of the observation within 1 week before the observation taking place. Any information obtained must not be used for any malicious reasons, and they should be used in the best interest of all parties involved. Any loose thought should be avoided. All parties must give consent if the information is to be used externally for the viewing of any parties that do not involve, and the participants should feel free to withdraw their consent at any time for any reason. Those who being observed should remain anonymous. The constructive feedback must be provided by the observer orally and also in the written format. The last one is the participation in the classroom observation should be voluntary.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So my name is Nur binti Sabri with metric number 050513. So today I'll be presenting on the advantages and also disadvantages of classroom observation and also field notes. First of all, I'm going to present on the advantages and disadvantages of classroom observation. The first advantage of classroom observation is that it provides an instant feedback. So after the observer done observing, she or he can instantly provide feedback to the teacher about his or her performance. The teacher can make a faster improvement and adjustment to the teaching style. The teacher can also begin to implement needed changes immediately based on the evaluator's critique. The second advantage is obtain additional information, since it provides information that other means of evaluation do not. As an example, the evaluator can observe the interactions between the teacher and his students to determine whether the teacher uses effective teaching method, has control over his class, treats students with respect, and address questions effectively. Moving on to the disadvantages of classroom observation, the first disadvantage is it is unreliable, since the observer is only making assumptions on the teacher's effectiveness in the classroom. Only during that 1 hour or 2 hour of observing would make the observation an unreliable one. Plus, the teacher also become more nervous when being observed, and their performance may be different. And the students' behavior may also change, as they will not want to suffer the consequences of misbehaving in front of the observer. Next is bias. So every workplaces have some degree of bias, and there is no exception with school. It might has the potential to invalidate the result, as the observer or the evaluator may impose his or her own belief about teaching on the teacher. He may not personally like the teacher, or may have unconscious bias related to the teacher's age, gender, or ethnic or academic background. But if the observer have a good relationship with the teacher, it may also invalidate the result.
Now, I am going to present about the field notes. Field notes are written observations recorded during or immediately following participant observation in the field and are considered critical to understand the phenomena encountered in the field. And they are one way of collecting data that can be combined with interviews and focus group or stand on their own as a text for analysis. And the purpose of field notes are to overcome the lack of data and to understand the context of the study. So the first one is to overcome the lack of data. Field note resolve the major issues of gaps in data. Very often, there is limited to no data about a topic in study, especially in a specific environment. And the problem might be known or suspected, but there is no way to validate this without primary research and data. So, by conducting field research, it helps to not only plug in the gaps in data, but also collect the supporting material. And it is a preferred research method for the researchers. The next one is to understand the context of the study. In many cases, the data collected is adequate, but the researchers still conduct the field research. This is because the researchers are trying to understand further the context of the study. Conducting field research also helps in gaining insight into the existing data. For example, a data states that horses from a stable farm generally wins races. So, when a researcher conducts a field research at a stable farm, he gains some information that the horses wins because they are pedigree horses and the stable owner hires the best jockey. However, conducting field research can also throw light into other factors that influence a success of study. For example, like the situation of the horses, the researcher only claims that the best jockey is the reason why the horses win and left out other important information such as the quality of the fodder, care provided, and the conducive weather conditions.
Hi, welcome back to the part 2 of these presentations. So for now, I'm gonna talk about the types of field notes. So yeah, let's go. There are two types of field notes that I'm going to focus for today, which for first one is descriptive field notes and reflective field notes. In descriptive field notes, the observer will record the details of what has occurred in the field. He or she will describe what happened, what they see, the background, the sound, location, and time. The observer should be objective and clear, and focus on the accuracy in transmitting the information according to what happens. In descriptive field notes, the observer will include a physical descriptions of a person, behavior, dialogue, event, activity, or setting. Last but not least, the final types of field notes, which is reflective field notes. Reflective field notes is based on the personal reflections and comments, using reflective thoughts to address work in progress. Unlike descriptive field notes, reflective field notes is a subjective, and it emphasizes on the speculations, feelings, or ideas. In other words, it deals with the analysis, methodology, ethics, conflict, and the observer's frame of mind. So I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Ethical consideration in field note.
The first ethical consideration in field notes is honesty and integrity. This means that you need to report your research honestly, and that this applies to your methods, data, results, and whether you have previously published any of it. You should not make up any data, including extrapolating unreasonably from some of your results. or do anything which could be construed as trying to mislead anyone. It is better to undersell than exaggerate your findings. The next one is objectivity. You should aim to avoid bias in any aspects of your research, including design, data analysis, interpretation, and peer review. For example, you should never recommend a peer reviewer someone that you know or who you have worked with, and you should try to ensure that no groups are inadvertently excluded from your research. This also means that you need to disclose any personal or financial interest that may affect your research. The next one is carefulness. Take care in carrying out your research to avoid careless mistakes. You should also review your work carefully and critically to ensure that your results are credible. It is also important to keep full records of your research. If you are asked to act as a peer reviewer, you should take the time to do the job effectively and fully. The next one is openness. You should always be prepared to share your data and results along with any tools that you have developed. The next one is respect for intellectual property. You should never plagiarize or copy other people's work and try to pass it off as your own. You should always ask for permission before using other people's tools or methods, unpublished data or results. By not doing so, that is plagiarism. Obviously, you need to respect copyrights and patents together with other forms of intellectual property and always acknowledge contribution to your research. If in doubt, acknowledge and cite to avoid any risk of plagiarism. The next one is confidentiality. You should respect anything that has been provided in confidence. You should also follow guidelines on protection of sensitive information such as patient records. The next one is responsible publication. You should publish to advance the state of research and knowledge, and not just to advance your career. This means, in essence, that you should not publish anything that is not new or that duplicates someone else's works. The next one is legality. You should always be aware of laws and regulations that governs your work and be sure that you conform to them. And the last one is human subjects protection. This is important. If your research involves people, you should make sure that you reduce any possible harm to the minimum and maximize the benefits both to participants and to the other people. This means you should not expose people to more tests than they are strictly necessary to fulfill your research aims. You should always respect human rights, including the right to privacy and autonomy. You may need to take particular care with vulnerable groups. I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Next, we are going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of field notes. The first advantage of field note is that they provide a good ongoing record and it can be used as a diary in order to give continuity. The information is produced firsthand and can be studied conveniently in the teacher's own time. In addition, they also help a teacher to relate the incidents and explore emerging trends. They also give a good general impressions of the classroom and its climate. The second advantage of field note is that it is very simple and easy to keep because they are taken down by the researcher and no outsider is required throughout the process. However, when using video and audio transcriptions, it tends to be a bit complicated since they need to use equipment such as video camera, tape recorder, microphone and also tripod. In addition, backup plan is needed and highly recommended so the event is not lost. Last but not least is the disadvantages of field note. The first one is it is difficult to record since the researcher might find it hard to write down everything while observing. And according to Bebe and Takashi in 1989, the speed of writing is slower as compared to speech, and it might be difficult to write down everything at the same time. And as a researcher, you must also rely on your memory and on personal discipline to write down and expand your observation as soon and as completely as possible. The second disadvantage of a field note is that it is highly subjective. This is because every researcher have their own personal belief and also discipline, and it could produce a physical distance because it is done in a different places. Last but not least, it can also produce an emotional distance because they focus on the recording and they are not in the situation to feel the emotion at that moment.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Fatin Aina binti Abdullah 050519. So I'll be explaining on the examples of research that I found where they use classroom observation and field note as their methodology. In this research, the authors aim to explore and analyze the assessment practices currently and commonly used by the lecturers. You know what is assessment practices, right? It is like a method that the lecturer use to assess their student regarding the lesson or the topic they learn. So the findings reveal that there are several practices used currently, and the most commonly one are the oral questioning and peer assessment. For the methodology, classroom observation is the main method used in this study, which I will explain in details how it was done by the authors. Before I start, I hope you already understand and get the concept of classroom observation and field note, which I believe they were well explained by my team members just now. So, of course, the classroom observation was conducted when the lecturers were teaching. Through the classroom observation, the authors will be able to watch and listen at the interaction between the lecturers and the students. In this research, there are 15 lecturers involved and observed. They were informed beforehand by the authors via telephone and email. This is to make sure they know when they are going to be observed and maybe the details of the observation, for example, the date and so on. Next, each lecturers were observed twice to obtain maybe the accurateness of the practices they use. Also, a total of 29 lessons were observed, which equal to 44 hours of observation. And the most importantly is during the observation, the authors recorded each of the observation for triangulation purposes. I'm sure you already heard this term before, and if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Azikin once mentioned it in her previous lesson. So I hope you still remember that. And last but not least, during the observation, 3 observers were required, where 2 of them will record the data during the observations and 1 of them will take care of the video recording. The next method used by the authors is field note. After the classroom observation was done, the observer they need to do reflective notes regarding the lesson they observe. This is also one of the type of field notes where the reflective notes was written by the observer right after the observation was done. From what I understand, the observation form itself is also part of the field note, as the authors use the form to jot down the notes during the observation. Lastly, the classroom observation data were collected through observational notes and were validated with the reflective notes written by the researchers. Not to forget, it is then verified by the respective lecturers to avoid personal bias while writing the reflective notes.
That's all from us. Thank you for watching.